At around 7:10 a.m. on the morning of October 25th, 1995, a school bus carrying students from Fox River Grove was headed toward a major intersection. The bus turned onto Algonquin Road and crossed a double-tracked grade crossing used by Metro passenger trains operating between Chicago and Northern Illinois. Just beyond the tracks, the bus reaches a traffic light at the intersection with US Route 14 and comes to a stop. However, the bus is 38 feet in length. The distance from the traffic lights to the grade crossing is only 30 feet. Thus, a part of the bus remains across the track. Suddenly, the crossing lights begin to flash and the barrier arms come down on top of the bus. It's the Metro Express commuter train 624 on its morning run to downtown Chicago, approaching at speed. The bus driver is oblivious to the flashing lights, the lowering barrier arms, and the fact that the RevHer bus is still fouling the track. 14 seconds since the barrier arm first came down, the traffic light finally turns green. However, the bus remains stationary. Something has distracted the driver. Metro train number 624, realizing the bus is not going to move, applies the emergency brakes. 5 seconds later, despite the green traffic light, the bus still hasn't moved. Why is the bus not moving? At 7:12 a.m., Metro train 624 slams into the rear left side of the school bus at approximately 60 miles per hour. The force of the collision devastates the bus. The impact struck the overhang beyond the rear axle, tearing the bus apart and separating it from the chassis. The passenger compartment is ripped free, while the twisted frame, engine, and wheels remain near the point of impact. The train itself suffers only minor damage, and none of the train's crew or its roughly 120 passengers are injured. The Fox River Grove police chief was already at the intersection at the time of the crash and radioed for assistance, while passing motorists stopped to help survivors who had been pulled from the wreckage. Emergency services arrived within 6 minutes, and local hospitals sent doctors directly to the scene. 5 students are dead, while 2 more will die in hospital. 24 other students are injured, some severely, while those more lucky escape without injury. But what had led to this critical chain of events? Why hadn't the bus moved when it had the chance? At around 6:15 a.m. on the 25th of October, 1995, a Fox River Grove school bus carrying students from Fox River Grove to Cary-Grove High School was scheduled to depart for its morning run. However, the regular driver didn't show for work that day, and as a result, Patricia Cattenkamp, a substitute driver, was assigned the job. Although she was fully licensed and had occasionally driven buses over the previous 8 years, her main role was an assistant transportation director for the school district. She had never driven the route before, nor passed over the railroad crossing, either in a school bus or her personal vehicle. At around 6:35 a.m., the 71-seat school bus departs the bus yard 20 minutes behind schedule. By 6:55 a.m., the first students board the bus before resuming along its route. By the time it reaches its final stop, 35 students are on board.
I got on and she started right in with, I need somebody to help me out the route. I don't know it. So I was like, okay, I'll do it.
She had no clue to go straight or whatever, you know. It's like she was still like confused.
It was around 7 a.m. that Metro train number 624 departed Crystal Lake, an express commuter service bound for downtown Chicago. The train consisted of 7 bi-level passenger cars and a Metro F40PH locomotive operating in push mode, with the engineer controlling the train from the cab car up front. As the bus turned onto Algonquin Road, it approached the railroad crossing. For the traffic lights to turn green on the far side, a vehicle had to cross the tracks and pull up to the intersection to trigger the sensor. What this meant was, the that Patricia Cattenkamp had to take the school bus across the tracks and stop at the traffic lights. However, owing to the poor design, there wasn't enough space between the intersection and the train tracks for her bus. This crossing is what is known as an interconnected crossing, where a traffic intersection is combined with a railroad grade crossing. While the crossing and the intersection were technically linked, the traffic lights were programmed by the Illinois Department of Transportation, while the crossing lights by Union Pacific, with little to no coordination between them, meaning that, in some cases, there were as little as 2 seconds between the traffic lights turning green and the train reaching the crossing. When a train approached, the crossing bells could activate even while the traffic lights were red, still holding a vehicle in place. While not too much of an issue in a regular car, in a vehicle the length of a school bus, the potential danger should have been obvious to officials. So on this day, unfamiliar with the route, bus driver Patricia Cattenkamp had no idea that several inches of her bus overhung the tracks. At 11 minutes past 7, with 20 seconds to impact, the railroad crossing lights activate and the barrier arms lower on top of the bus. Initially, the students joke about it and find it funny, but as the seconds pass and the train gets closer, the laughter turns to panic. Students begin screaming, yelling for the bus driver to move. 14 seconds after the warning bells started, the traffic light holding the bus in place finally turns green. But distracted by the commotion behind her, the driver fails to notice the green light. At 7:12 a.m., train number 624 strikes the rear of the school bus. In the aftermath of the tragedy, investigators moved quickly to determine how such a collision could occur at a protected crossing. Investigators determined the initial cause was the driver stopping at a red light, unaware that the rear of her bus remained on the tracks. But the investigation made it clear this was not a simple error and that the space between the intersection and the train tracks was insufficient for long vehicles like a school bus. Furthermore, the traffic lights and the crossing bells relied on interconnected systems controlled by separate agencies, programmed independently and without coordination. In some cases, there were as little as 2 seconds between the traffic light turning green and a train reaching the crossing. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded that even if the driver had recognized her bus was over the track, clearing it would have required her to run a red light. The final report, released in October of 1996, placed primary responsibility on the driver's misjudgment, but stopped short of assigning criminal fault, and she was never charged. The inevitable lawsuits followed though, and by 2004, settlements totaling $27.3 million were paid by the school districts, Union Pacific, Metra, engineering contractors, and the Illinois Department of Transportation. The tragedy led to sweeping reforms, and dozens of similar crossings were modified. Bus routes were redesigned to reduce rail crossings, and training standards were updated statewide. Memorials now stand near the crossing and at Cary-Grove High School, and in 2015, the site itself was renamed Seven Angels Crossing. What happened that morning was not caused by a single mistake, but by a system that left no room for error and no time to escape. That's all for today's video. If you found value in it, I'd love it if you subscribed and joined me for the next one. To watch one of my collaborations with fascinating horror, you can click the link on screen. And as always, thanks for watching.